This is Brooks Melchior, Sports by Brooks, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. I do this every weekday, Monday through Friday, noon to about 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 a.m. out here on the West Coast. I'm in Los Angeles, and we have a big show like this every single day. We're not just going to have guests on. We have a lot of guests today, but we're going to give you some other stuff too. Some under the radar sports stuff that Sports by Brooks really is known for. But my God, look at this college football hour that we have and recruiting coming up. It doesn't get any better than the lineup that we have in this first hour of live Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And coming up, we'll have Scott Russell down in Louisiana. He's going to from footballscoop.com, and they have been making news all week, reporting that Urban Meyer could be in play at Florida State. And also in the last 24 hours, reporting that Jim Harbaugh, what a shock, but it is somewhat of a shock, I guess. Footballscoop.com reporting that he is eyeing an exit strategy. How serious were these stories this week so far, at least? Well, the athletic director at Florida State, Dave Coburn, has already come out with lengthy, vehement denials of Football Scoop's reporting. In other words, it touched a nerve, and there's absolutely truth to it because Football Scoop, if you go and follow them on Twitter, you may not. Football Scoop on Twitter, at Football Scoop, is the number one source. Take it from someone who's been doing this for almost 20 years. That's the number one source for finding out when a coach is going to get fired and finding out when a coach is going to get hired in college football. They also do pro. But if you want to know what's going to happen to Jim Harbaugh, Willie Taggart, Gus Malzahn, Jeremy Pruitt, Clay Helton, Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, Chad Morris at Arkansas, many more. If you want to know, you've got to follow Football Scoop on Twitter. So Scott Russell from Football Scoop, who runs the operation, good friend of mine, going to join us coming up here shortly. Also, Stuart Mandel needs no introduction. He is the lead college football guy for The Athletic. He's their editor for college football, long time college football writer, Sports Illustrated, now with The Athletic. He'll join us. Mike Farrell of Rivals, the godfather of online recruiting in college football, of course, involving high school. Mike Farrell will join us from Rivals, also coming up this hour, 1 hour, right? That's all three of those guys. That's a great get once a week for most shows. Here, we have it in a single hour. It's going to be amazing. And we don't just have guests on to have them on, all right? You're going to find that out. We're going to have some incisive stuff going on, great questions, positioned to the strengths of our guests. You're going to get a lot out of these interviews coming up with Scott, Mike, and Stuart. And then in the next hour, we're going to talk to one of the preeminent NFL insiders. You know who he is. Ian Rappaport will join us. Joined us before on the show. Great guy. He'll be with us from New York, and we'll go through the trading deadline. We'll go through which teams are sellers, which teams could be buyers, some of the news that Ian has recently broken, like the status of Nick Foles, what's happening there with Jacksonville, all kinds of stuff coming out. There always is on Ian Rappaport's Twitter timeline. He'll join us coming up at the top of the hour. All right. But I was at the Clippers-Lakers game last night and got a chance to watch Kawhi Leonard for the first time in a Clipper uniform in person, right? No Paul George. And it was the marquee matchup of, at least in the NBA of the night. Of course, you got the World Series, but outside of DC and Houston, not a whole lot of interest. And it's not a coincidence we're not talking about it. Hey, look, if this was a Houston show, a DC show, a baseball show, that's one thing. But we're really trying to appeal to the maximum number of people of you out there. And of course, the Clippers and the Lakers, that was on the tip of everybody's tongue last night. You watched it. I watched it. How could you not? It was a special night, and it was a playoff atmosphere. I've been to innumerable Lakers and Clippers games out here in Los Angeles over the last 2 decades. I've been to playoff games. I've been to NBA Finals games. I've sat on the court in those $3,000 seats myself. I've had every possible experience you can have. I've been there when the Clippers have been very good in the past, on the precipice of the NBA Finals, right? I have never experienced, outside of the playoffs, for a regular season game, the kind of atmosphere that there was last night for what was supposed to be a Clippers home game, involving, of course, Kawhi and the Clippers. Anticipation. The secondary market for tickets now for Clippers games has spiked over 600%, to give you an idea of the demand. By the way, there's an interesting little promotion that the Clippers are running this season, if you haven't heard. But if you wear red and blue, if you see lines outside of Staples Center for Clippers games this year, and George and Kawhi play the whole year, they're not hurt, right? Things go as normal. The Clippers, in my opinion, are going to go to the NBA Finals and win the NBA title. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that, why I think that, in a second. But if those guys stay in there, stay in the lineup, and they remain in contention, you're probably going to see on Sports Center or whatever film footage of people camping out for Clippers tickets this season. And I'm going to explain to you right now why. Now, the games are sold out, or they will be completely sold out, in advance. But it's a pretty cool idea the Clippers have. They're going to make available between 50 and 200 tickets per game. They're going to make those tickets available for $10, right? Keep in mind, I think the get me in, or the average, not get me in, but the average ticket price for the Clippers is well over $200. The average ticket price for the Lakers is $200. Let me repeat this. The average ticket price for the Lakers is $280. Insanity. Sold out. So, but the whole point in telling you this is you're going to see probably lines outside Staples Center for Clippers tickets. And the reason is they're making these tickets available, $10 seats, right? The day of the game, if you wear red and blue. So what's going to end up happening is, if the Clippers turn out to be as good as I think they're going to be, you're going to start to see lines. You're going to start to see people lined up the night before for these seats. I have no doubt that that's going to happen. So if that does happen, you're ahead of the game. You know why. But in watching the Clippers and the Lakers last night, being in that environment as I had great seats. It was an electric atmosphere environment, and you're looking at somebody who's been to a ton of these games at Staples Center involving both of these teams. But this was a transcendent moment. This was a NBA Finals type feel. And the great irony of it all is, much of this is based on Kawhi, but of course, much of it based on Anthony Davis joining LeBron. And so with this, a Clippers home game, I want to give you an indication of what it was like last night with the Lakers and Clippers playing for, again, what was supposed to be a Clippers home game. With that in mind, Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, is going to put up a clip or two of the reception Kawhi Leonard got. Clippers, Kawhi Leonard. Cam, go ahead and run the clips that you have of the crowd response to Kawhi Leonard for this Clippers home game. Punch up that video for us when you get the opportunity.
Kawhi Leonard at the free throw line. We welcome our audience from TNT to Los Angeles. Davis picks up his first. So far, we've seen the Lakers go 5 of 9 from the floor. The Clippers have gone 3 of 8. Davis has 4. LeBron has 4. And so far, the scoring has been led off the bench Montez Harrell has put in 4 for the Clippers.
It looked like Frank Vogel.
Cool.
Okay, there you go. The whole point was you could hear the boos, right? But it was also that way during the introductions. And at one point when Kawhi was actually addressing the crowd, there were boos. So the support of the Clippers is somewhat akin to the Chargers here in Los Angeles. Maybe not that bad. I mean, the Chargers are literally a team that I still call San Diego, and I'm here in Los Angeles. That's my job, to follow these teams, right? I have, over the last couple of months, once a week, driven down to the new stadium, the SoFi Stadium for the Rams and Chargers, just to follow the progress. I've been to StubHub Center many times where the Chargers play. And I can honestly say, if you walked up to somebody in Los Angeles right now, it's about a 60% chance they are not going to know that the Chargers are the Los Angeles Chargers right now. All right. Now, the Clippers, they're the Clippers. The Clippers are like that prodigal son in your family who never really quite made it. You see him once a year during the holidays. You pat him on the head, and you have an awareness of this person, right? But you really only revisit that thought process 2 or 3 times a year, and they never quite get there in life. That's the Clippers. And so when you see that kind of weird response, that is weird. It's Kawhi Leonard. You're talking about, along with LeBron, the best known basketball player on earth right now. He's at the height. This is peak Kawhi. And he's getting snowed under with boos. Now tell me that's not a motivator if you're Kawhi. It's probably the best thing that could have happened. But in watching, and I don't know if you watched the game last night, in watching the Clippers and the Lakers last night, I'm convinced now the Clippers are going to be the next Warriors. When you think about dominance, you think about the record and how we remember that now kaput Warriors dynasty. I think the Clippers are next in line, and you heard it right here first. All right? It's going to take Paul George coming back, but this roster is a special group of guys. You could see it last night. It's a completely different situation than the Lakers. First of all, LeBron clearly is just not the same player. You know, he takes plays off all the time. He's not involved defensively, offensively. He had trouble with his shot last night. I would look at his points and look at his rebounds. Don't get caught up in his statistics last night because he missed a lot of shots. So did Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is unbelievable. Just unbelievable. What a player. But they seem, and Danny Green is a great addition to that lineup, especially if he can continue to perform the way he did last night. But I would say he arguably is the key to that team, because they've got to have outside threats, and that was their undoing last year and even this year with Anthony Davis. That's going to play a big part in how the Lakers do. But the reason I say this about the Clippers is the Clippers have this underlying energy spurred on by guys like Patrick Beverley and Lou Williams that the Lakers just don't have. They don't have that glue. All right. So I'm predicting right now, Clippers are going to win the NBA title. Mark, I don't care if it's the first game of the year. Don't tell me to relax. People are on Twitter telling me it's one game. Doesn't matter. I can see it. So we'll get back to more NBA, but now we're going to talk to the oracle of the status of college football coaches, as far as I'm concerned, in the United States of America. Scott Russell of Football Scoop is joining us now. We'll bring him up here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Scott, how you doing today?
Hey, Brooks, I'm awesome, buddy. How are you?
I can't thank you. I'm great, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Now, where are you today?
Lovely Baton Rouge, Louisiana, home for me.
Unbelievable. And what a place to be. Tell us about the environment we saw from the Florida game and just the whole overall feel of the town. And I know you've lived there a while. I mean, what's it feel like right now? Is this a different kind of a transcendent feel about these LSU Tigers just around town?
I was at a meeting this morning, and I was with a longtime LSU fan, huge booster, supporter. And he said, Scott, I can remember 2011 felt like this, but I've never had another year where it's felt like this in the last 30 years that you can remember. It's just different. My response to him was, I've never had any sort of feeling like this here in Baton Rouge about the Tigers. The offense is just so dynamic. It's just a totally different. I remember in 11, I know exactly what he's talking about. But you were hoping that they'd win. All the confidence in the world, the offense is going to put up the points. It's a totally different dynamic because you're actually a little concerned about the defense. But the Tiger team is for real. They and Ohio State look like the best two teams to me so far.
And I think one of the great stories of college football this year is what's behind what you're talking about, and that's Joe Brady coming over from the Saints. Can you explain kind of that dynamic that's gone on the offensive side of that staff?
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is people talk about Joe Brady coming from the Saints as if he was, Pete Carmichael, as if he was
right.
Sean Payton's right-hand guy. He wasn't even the right-hand guy to the right-hand guy to the right-hand guy. He wasn't the quarterback's coach. He wasn't the receivers coach. He was an offensive assistant to the staff. He's incredibly sharp, personable. But I think my point in saying that is, imagine how good Sean Payton is. Imagine how good Pete Carmichael is. The guys down, basically, the graduate assistant basically comes to the LSU offense and just totally reignites that staff. Ensminger's a really smart coach, and he's worked really well with Steve. And they got a thing going there. Throughout the spring, Brady was really running the installs. And Steve absorbed it all, and they're working very well together. LSU's going to, I think they've already talked to Joe. They got a big package for Joe. They don't want Joe going anywhere, and Joe understands that. So Joe Brady's going to be really, really well compensated pretty soon here.
Interesting. Scott Russell of footballscoop.com, Football Scoop on Twitter. Since 1999, your premier source for coaching job information. So when we're talking about coaching jobs, you guys have been in the news just in the last 48 to 72 hours reporting on Florida State, what's happening there, and what's happening at Michigan. What's the very latest now with Jim Harbaugh in Michigan?
So this morning, right, Jim must have sent a letter to either parents of a current team or his commits saying, hey, listen, that report, that I'm out there looking at the NFL, total, I think he used the term total crap. He said, I'm fully committed to your sons, their development, their education, and everything. And honestly, I don't know what else he could say. I mean, I think every coach, when you're 7 games into a season, has to say the very same. The reality is, Jim and those who advise Jim, largely family, are thinking about Jim's future and trying to figure out the best thing, both for him and for Michigan. These guys love Michigan football. They love Michigan. So they don't want to do anything wrong on anyone's behalf, but Jim's certainly looking at options down the road.
That's very interesting. Now, the Florida State situation, and you've got Willie Taggart there now, and what exactly has been playing out with you guys in relation to that situation involving the head coach at Florida State?
So we reported, not yesterday, the day before, that wheels are in motion. The athletic director is engaged kind of his donor class, seeing what the appetite is if they have to make a move. Willie's got a really big buyout, $17 million. Completely unpalatable, but so is another year of 3 or 4 wins. Best thing for all parties. I think they're 3 and 4 right now. The best thing for all parties is for him to string together a couple of wins. He's got some really important games coming up. But again, you're an athletic director of a major public university. You can't just sit there and go, boy, I hope we win some games. You got to prepare for all possible, possibilities. So, they got together and they started talking about what the future might entail if we have to make a move. The athletic director came out, I guess, to Tallahassee Democrat and confirmed that, yeah, they did have a meeting, that they're talking to people about, if we got to make a move, what are we going to do? We had been told by sources in the profession that Urban Meyer was high on their list. Athletic director came out yesterday and said Urban won't be the next guy. I don't know if that's because they got some back channel information. There's no interest there, or if he just doesn't want to make a move that way. But things are being prepared for if they have to make a move on Willie.
What was your thought process when you heard the Urban Meyer Dallas Cowboys stuff that came off of Colin Cowherd's show? If you did hear that, and what's going on in your mind, at least with Urban Meyer right now, as it pertains to a head coaching opportunity, let's say in the next year or two?
I didn't see what I saw some news out there that he had said something about the Cowboys. I didn't see it. So fill me in. What did he say?
They were talking about Lincoln Riley, and I think it was taken out of context in the reporting for it, because I actually heard it live. And so Colin Cowherd was trying to explain in his mind why Lincoln Riley would be interested in the Cowboys job, but maybe not any other job in the NFL, or not just a run-of-the-mill job. And then he had Urban Meyer on with him as he was giving this monologue. And then he asked Urban Meyer what he thought of the Dallas Cowboys job in the context of how valuable a job it is. And Urban Meyer said, hey, it's one of those jobs that any coach in any situation would consider if they called. So Colin Cowherd pressed him and said, well, if they called you, would you listen? And he said, of course. But it wasn't as if he was pining for the job. And of course, Jason Garrett is still under the employ of the Cowboys. So that's what that conversation was about. And it's kind of a jumping off point for me to ask you about Urban. But what are your thoughts overall on the future of Urban Meyer?
Well, a couple things. One, Urban is, he's been doing this for a really long time. He's kind of the master of coach speak. He's going to say really super, super things about just about any opportunity out there. And you ask about Lincoln, who I don't think they know each other real well. I think Urban's going to say all the right things. Like, Lincoln's done amazing things his first couple of years, right? And Lincoln, being from Texas and with those roots, Lincoln would absolutely, have to consider the Cowboys job, as would a lot of coaches. I don't know that Urban, I certainly don't think Urban was pining for that job. That's not his style at all. And Urban, honestly, is more of a college guy. Urban actually loves recruiting. Not everybody loves recruiting. Urban really loves that. And he loves working with young men like that. I don't think he has that interest to try and prove himself at the NFL level, if that's such a thing. I think Urban's pretty happy doing what he's doing. I think Urban's family is okay with what he's doing right now. Way less stress. He's having a lot of fun. You can see that on his face. And from speaking to a good friend of his, he says he really sounds light and relaxed. We wrote an article. We do a one bold prediction, each of us at Football Scoop. We wrote right at the beginning of the year. Been doing it for 5 or 6 years. And my one bold prediction was largely based off a conversation with a longtime Ohio State staffer. And I'd spoken to him the week before. And I said, what's the mood, within the building? And he said, it's night and day. He's like, Urban, I'm not going to say control freak, but Urban's very controlling of the way things transpire there. And people feel a lot of pressure to perform to Urban standards. And Ryan Day's just a different guy. And he wants everybody to be their best. He just goes about it a different way. And kind of light, airy, breath of fresh air within the building. And he said, but guys are responding. Guys are taking it on themselves. And there's just this awesome atmosphere in this building. So my one bold prediction was that Ryan Day was going to lead him to an undefeated season national championship. And people are going to go, man, was Urban that great? Urban is that good. He's an incredible coach. But, could Ryan Day do that? And, thinking about Urban's future, it also makes me think about Ryan Day's future. If Ryan Day comes in there and runs the table, does he have his eyes set on the NFL versus college? I don't know the answer to that one. I don't know Ryan that well. So that'll be an interesting one to watch, what happens in the next 3 months there.
One more thing for you. Take a shot at the Rutgers job. Who do you think gets that job?
Well, initially, I think everybody thinks Greg Schiano. Then the Joe Moorhead came into play. Now, Brooks, you know this as well as I do. There's a lot of reasons for different names to be out in the wind. Agents don't like agents never like it when it's a sole source negotiation, because then they can't leverage that for anything on their side. So agents always like for there to be at least two dogs in the hunt. So Joe Moorhead's name is very well out there. In all honesty, I really understand why it would make a lot of sense for Joe Moorhead to make that move, for all parties.
Yep.
My gut still says Greg Schiano becomes the next head coach there. That's a fascinating story about how that played out last March. And so it would be really interesting to see it come to fruition. I know there's actually a couple of high school coaches we speak to fairly frequently up in the Jersey area. They love Greg. They'd love to see him come back there. So my bet would be on Greg, but that'll play out in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Outstanding stuff, Scott. Thank you so much, and enjoy that gorgeous day down in Baton Rouge.
Thanks, my friend. Good talking to you.
That's Scott Russell, of course, of Football Scoop and footballscoop.com. And it really is your premier source for college coaching information, not just head coaching, not just high-profile coaching opportunities, but they are an institution within the coaching ranks. And there's probably not a single person walking around right now who knows more about coaching situations at every single major college school and, to a certain extent, the NFL. And I think when we talk about Ryan Day, that's an example of Lincoln Riley. These are crossover guys who could end up in the National Football League easily. And we've talked about Ryan Day on this show in relation to that, with some people in the know as a possibility. And certainly Lincoln Riley, it goes without saying that he is the anointed successor now that Sean Payton has his, not that it means anything, but the contract extension that Jay Glazer broke for Fox. Sean Payton has his contract extension with the Saints. He had long been rumored as a possible contender for that Dallas Cowboys head coaching position. But now you've got him with the Saints locked up in the future. Lincoln Riley is there hovering, I guess you could say. And we'll have to wait and see. Usually what ends up happening in these situations, what ends up happening is, and I said it yesterday, Cowboys fans were probably cursing that win over the Eagles because it meant, oh, here we go again. Cowboys, we're going to play just well enough that Garrett's going to save his job. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Boy, did it ever play out with an assist from Amari Cooper in the trade with the Raiders last year. So we're going to talk to Mike Farrell of Rivals here coming up. He is really the godfather of online recruiting, as we understand it, the national recruiting director for Rivals. That's coming up. And then Stuart Mandel of The Athletic will join us. Wall-to-wall college football. God, I love this. I'm like a pig in slop today. But before we do that, before we get to Mike, I want to throw one more clip up of Kawhi Leonard, the game I was at last night. It was the Lakers and the Clippers at Staples Center. It was a home game for the Clippers, but we want to show you through our producer, Cam Smith, we want to show you what that really means in Los Angeles if you're a Clippers player, even a Kawhi Leonard. Go ahead and punch up that clip of Kawhi and his reception from the fans at Staples Center in Los Angeles. Kawhi Leonard of the Clippers last night in the game against the Lakers with the Clippers as
forward 6'7" is
19. He's getting booed there. Do you have another one? We got another one of those clips. How about the fire, by the way? Maybe I'm the only person in the building, but I'm kind of like, do we really have to do that? Is it that important that we've got an open flame? Not just any. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, when you think about, here's a guy that's coming home. He's from Moreno Valley out in the IE, the Inland Empire. We call it the IE, the Inland Empire here in Los Angeles. That's San Bernardino. That's Riverside. And he's out from that area. Reggie Miller, originally from Riverside. Moreno Valley, that's kind of the home area of Kawhi Leonard, but a SoCal guy coming home. And somewhat beloved, I guess you could say by now, by the public, and pulled off one of the greatest coups in NBA free agent history in bringing himself and Paul George in at the same time with the Clippers, transforming that organization into what I think what's going to be interesting. We should hold on to those clips, Cam, because I have a feeling it's going to be very different by the end of the year. When you're assessing the Lakers, I just want you to know from somebody who's here. I'm not saying, maybe I am saying this, but maybe I'm saying I'm the expert. I know better than everybody else, but I really believe this Clippers team is the next Warriors dynasty. Now, that's not to say that George and Kawhi aren't brittle. We've got load management already in play with Kawhi. Who knows if that won't crop up with Paul George? Very well could. And that could affect the fortunes of the team of the regular season and how we look at that team as a dynastic team or just a very, very good team. You didn't have load management in play with the Durant edition of the Golden State Warriors, right? But I do think that this Clipper team is going to be the transcendent team. And I'm repeating this over and over. And boy, am I going to look like a jackass if it doesn't happen. But I just don't see it with the Lakers. I don't. There's been a lot of talk about, LeBron had all that time off. He's got all this extra energy. He looks so good in the preseason. He looked fine. He didn't look great last night. He looked okay. I mean, they missed a lot of shots. And, when you talk about missing shots, I don't think it's a coincidence. When you're talking about a Clippers defense that's as good a defense now, if not the best, I mean, they already have a lockdown defender in Patrick Beverley, all defensive team in the NBA. Now you add in two guys who are well known for their defense, all defensive players, all defense in the NBA, and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, prolific offensive players. I mean, I think it's amazing that you look at that team that was already a playoff team. It's kind of like going from the Clippers before, where this team nobody knew. It was like a V6 engine without being a car, right? Without the shell around it, the body of the car around it. Now you've upgraded to a V8 and you've got a beautiful vehicle. You got a whatever, Land Rover, something to that, and a BMW, Mercedes. That's what it is now. But they've got the goods. They've got the goods. So we'll get back to some NBA talk. I want to talk about the discussion that took place last night during Inside the NBA on TNT. Chuck Barkley, Kenny Smith, Ernie Johnson, and Shaq had some very interesting comments about Daryl Morey that really haven't made the rounds that I've seen in the media. We're going to tell you what happened coming up. But first, we're going to go out and visit with Mike Farrell of Rivals.com, National Recruiting Director, the godfather of recruiting, Rivals Mike on Twitter. And that's Mike Farrell. And it's an honor and a pleasure to have him. How you doing, Mike? I appreciate it.
Good. How are you? You like the lighting? It makes me look angelic.
I know it is. It's got kind of an orange. You're glowing.
Yeah, I do it on purpose.
Yeah, and you're branded as well. I like that.
Yeah, they made me do that, so I have no choice.
So, I'm so excited to have you because you're a guy who has this wide swath of information. Because when you look at teams, you really understand in college football, it's so critical, the underpinning of talent and the underpinning of the ongoing recruiting that's happening with these head coaches. And so that's why I want to start off in talking to you about some of these college football teams, a program like Auburn, because Auburn, to me, for someone who doesn't really understand recruiting or where Gus might be on recruiting, they're sort of a mystery team. How good is this team? So what's your opinion of the state of the Auburn program going forward?
They do a good job recruiting. They've obviously got a problem in their own state, and that's Alabama. similar to South Carolina with their problem with Clemson. So they're always going to be battling for in-state kids and probably losing more battles than they win. But they do a very good job going into Georgia. They do a good job going into Florida. The roster always has talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball lately. Gus Malzahn's a good recruiter. I just think they're in the wrong division. I mean, they're a good program. They're always going to be there when it comes to a top 25 team, maybe top 15. But, the way Alabama has been winning lately, and obviously the way LSU looks with an offense now, I just think Auburn's going to be that third or second tier team for a while.
And of course, if you talk to Auburn people, they'll say to themselves, well, why can't we be Alabama? And so why can't Auburn be in Alabama? Give us some perspective on your lengthy career in recruiting. What Nick Saban does, is this unprecedented, what he has done and what he continues to do in terms of the level of talent and the level of coaching?
Yeah, I mean, he's won, I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but he's won about 8 of the last 11 recruiting titles. That's never been done. Recruiting goes back to the magazines and the 900 numbers and all that stuff. I've been doing it since 1997. So it's unprecedented for me. Now, maybe back in the day, Notre Dame had the number 1 recruiting class every year just because everybody just assumed Notre Dame had the best kids. But since we've actually been drilling down and looking at prospects and grading them, Alabama has done something unprecedented. And that's the main reason is Nick Saban. I mean, the tradition at Alabama sells itself, but it didn't when Shula was there. It did when Nick Saban came in, started winning, giving it some credibility. But Auburn's won a national championship. They went to another title game. The fans at Auburn are very interesting because they hate Gus and they love Gus and they hate Gus.
Right.
Whereas the Alabama fans obviously see Nick Saban can do no wrong. But I've noticed lately Alabama fans are a little bit worried because Clemson's won 2 of the last 3 national championships, and they feel that they might be sliding behind them too. But Auburn's always going to be that number 2 in the state. I just don't see that changing until Nick Saban steps down.
Visiting with Mike Farrell, of course, Rivals.com, and he is the national recruiting director. Goes without saying, really, Rivals Mike on Twitter. I'm a Georgia guy, by the way, and graduated from the University of Georgia. So I'm eyeing Florida. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on because Dan Mullen proved at Mississippi State can get it done with less talent. But I think there's some question in the back of people's minds about his ability to recruit.
Right.
If Dan Mullen could become a transcendent or is perhaps a transcendent recruiter in waiting, that program could revisit the heights of Steve Spurrier, perhaps, and Urban Meyer, perhaps. But what's your assessment of Mullen as a recruiter and how you think things are going to go for him at Florida?
He's a better talent evaluator than a recruiter. He's not going to be Urban Meyer. He's not even going to be Will Muschamp when it comes to recruiting at Florida. But he's a great coach. He coaches kids up. He turns players like Kyle Trask, who have never started a football game in their lives, into good football players. He made Dak Prescott, a kid that LSU didn't want in their home state, into a college football star. Obviously, he was the offensive coordinator at Florida when Tim Tebow was there. He's very inventive, and he coaches kids up. Kirby Smart recruits at a high level. They've won the last 2 recruiting titles, at least for us. But he's not coaching them up to the same level as Dan Mullen. So if I'm a Florida fan, I'm a little frustrated that my recruiting ranking's not as high and it's not as exciting. There aren't as many 5-star kids looking at my program. But I'd rather have a guy who develops than a guy who can recruit.
Interesting. It sounds more and more, and I think you alluded to this when you were talking about Saban in comparison to a Shula or past coaches, that this really comes down to a reflection. When we're talking about recruiting, why is a guy recruited, or why are schools at the very top of the rankings every year? Does this really come down to that one head coach and his commitment to it?
Comes down to his staff, but the head coach himself is extremely important. We've seen the turnover at Alabama, and it hasn't affected recruiting. They've lost so many coaches over the years, and they still finish in the top 2 or 3 in recruiting. It comes down to a guy who can recruit and develop. Nick Saban's also a tremendous talent developer. not just with defensive backs, which he's known for, but with every level of the football team, which is why they keep sending so many guys to the pros. Urban Meyer was a tremendous developer of talent as well. I don't think Urban Meyer was a great coach, believe it or not, game coach. But he recruited at a high level, he developed at a high level, and his teams were so talented that he won national championships with them. So those type of guys who love recruiting, and believe it or not, Nick Saban loves recruiting. He acts like he doesn't. He's never smiling in any of the pictures you see on Twitter, posing with kids, and he's always gruff about it. He says he hates recruiting rankings and all that stuff, but he loves recruiting. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so successful at it. And I think that's the thing. Georgia fans have a great recruiter. Do they have a great coach? And that's the big question there. And Florida fans have a great coach. Do they have a great recruiter? You need both, I think, to win national championships.
Visiting with Mike Farrell of Rivals. And one more question for you, Mike. LSU. I've heard a lot of talk about LSU. How could you not? You got Joe Burrow in the Heisman conversation, but LSU perhaps as the number one team in the country. Where are they in terms of talent? Where are they in terms of the state of the program? Is this a program that's going to become another Alabama, another Clemson, a perennial college football playoff a contender?
No. Talent-wise, they have it. No doubt. They've always had it. Under Les Miles, they had it. Obviously, under Nick Saban, they had it. Offensively, this is the first time we've seen an explosive offense. This is the first time I've seen a quarterback like Joe Burrow go from average Joe to Tom Brady. I mean, he looks amazing. Can Ed Orgeron be that coach to consistently keep them flowing offensively, recruiting defensive talent? Yes, but there's still Alabama. I mean, that's the problem. If Nick Saban retires tomorrow, then my answer is yes. But until they beat Alabama, until they get past that and get over that hump, I'm going to say no, despite the fact that they recruit well and they have a very talented roster.
Is Jeremy Pruitt coaching Tennessee this time next year?
Wow. I'm going to say yes. There's obviously buyout there. I don't think they want to give up on a coach after 2 seasons. I think they'd like to see this through. I think there's obviously some frustration. The Georgia State loss was absolutely horrible. They're starting to play a little bit better. So I think he's going to get a third year, but I don't think he's going to last beyond that.
Interesting. I really appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for hopping on, and hope to do it again with you. Thanks so much.
No problem. Love your feed. Love everything about it, and I'll be on anytime you want.
Thank you. That's Mike Farrell, of course, of Rivals.com. He's Rivals Mike on Twitter. And, man, we are giving you a college football primer and feast. This is just amazing. This entire hour, we've got Stuart Mandel coming up of The Athletic. Just visited with Scott Russell, and I'm just kind of giddy about it because I love having guys on at the very top of the media when it comes to college football and really informing yourself about these programs, because so much of this is we're watching LSU and people are excited about it, but it's not like the NFL. It's not that we have this standardized situation with the NFL where we have fantasy. We have the ability to empirically evaluate these NFL teams, slice and dice them statistically. You don't have that opportunity normally in college football. It's very opaque, and that's why I'm asking these questions. What is it about Alabama? Is it Nick Saban personally? How are they able to create this dynasty where in the past coaches after Bear Bryant weren't able to do that? What's the difference? What about Florida? Dan Mullen, is that going to be in the future a transcendent program? How do we assess that? And what is his response, Mike Farrell's response? It's Dan Mullen, great coach, not a great recruiter. Well, those are the damn questions I want answered. When I'm trying to figure out whether you're betting on the game, whether you're a fan of the team, whether you're running the athletic department, I mean, what are we looking at? And we're talking about a guy in Mike Farrell who is as knowledgeable in recruiting, not only right now, but in the context of the past, which is extremely important when trying to assess the present and the future as anybody. So that's why we're doing that. That's why we're going through all of college football today from every possible angle and layer to try to give you some insight, whatever your perspective and interest may be. And next up, we're going to go and talk to Stuart Mandel of The Athletic when we get that opportunity. Our producer today is Cam Smith. And my name is Brooks Melchior. We do this every weekday live from noon to 2 Eastern time, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And Stuart, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you for popping on.
Thanks for having me. It's a cool moment. I've never actually seen you, Brooks.
Yes, I'm actually 3D, kind of,
Yeah.
at least, sort of, right? But so lots to talk about, Stuart. And first of all, I want to compliment you on The Athletic. You guys have really, really exploded in popularity. It's been a huge success. Can you kind of describe your situation at Athletic and how that thing has progressed?
It's been really amazing to watch how much it's grown. It's hard to believe this is only our third college football season. When we started, we had a staff of 7 college football writers. Now that's almost 40 when you include all of our team writers. And it's just been really refreshing and encouraging to see that people really do still value good journalism and deep storytelling. And the response has been overwhelming. Obviously, you got over 600,000 subscribers at this point, and almost all of them have come in the last 2 years.
So describe what your role at The Athletic is specifically, because, I mean, you're everywhere.
Yeah. I'm the editor-in-chief of our college football vertical. Obviously, I'm still writing just as much as I always did at SI or Fox, but also helping to coordinate and oversee all of our coverage. It's not me alone. Obviously, we have 7 editors who are doing the day-to-day, but I'm still heavily involved in certainly our hiring and our overall strategy and helping to plan coverage of certain events. So it's been fun to add that responsibility, the leadership part of it to just what I've always done, which is cover college football.
And you guys, you're not just print per se. You're not just text. I mean, now you're moving into podcasts and video.
Yeah, Bruce Feldman and I have hosted the Audible for 5 years, but that predated the Athletic. He wasn't even here at first when I joined. So this football season is the first one where the Athletic has its own network of podcasts, not just the Audible, but Andy Staples has his own show, and we've got about a dozen team podcasts right now that are going up twice a week. And the cool thing is you can listen to an episode a week on Apple Podcasts and all the places people love to get podcasts, but then our subscribers can get some bonus content every week on the Athletics app.
And I just wanted you to know personally, because I haven't, related this to you directly, the nature of the website, because websites are so clunky now and they take over your browser, that there's so many cases where I want to click on content, but I actually don't, because I don't want takeover pages, pop unders, audio that's starting, blowing my computer up. I think one of the big keys to the Athletic is how clean it is, how static it is, and even right down to something like a podcast, how easy it is. So congratulations across the board, because it's been a phenomenal thing you guys are building.
Thanks so much. We appreciate your support, and it's been obviously, like I said, so encouraging and refreshing in the last couple of years for exactly the reason you said. People understand that you're going to get something you can't get elsewhere for a relatively low price.
And you've got an all-star team of talent that you guys have curated and handpicked. And so I'm a subscriber. I'm on it every single day. And it's not just college football, folks. You're going to want to check that out. So now let's talk turkey with Stuart Mandel of The Athletic, college football editor-in-chief. Let's first talk about a statistic that really jumped off the page when I was reading through your recent mailbag, and that is Lovie Smith and Jim Harbaugh. What do those two guys actually, Stuart, have in common?
Credit to the reader who wrote in with that one. They both have exactly one top 10 win during their current tenures after Lovie got his this past weekend, obviously against Wisconsin.
It's unbelievable. And now, of course, we've got some rumors that, we just had Scott Russell on from Football Scoop, one of my favorite guys, and they reported, the eternal rumor about Jim Harbaugh. And the first thing I want to ask you about Jim Harbaugh in the context of your career and having followed him for so long, I mean, what kind of stock do you put into Harbaugh rumors? Because it literally is something you can set your watch to every year.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a little bit premature right now. I think people are assuming that they're going to end up having a rough season, that they would lose this week to Notre Dame, lose to Ohio State, and you're going to get in this predicament where a lot of the fan base wants him gone. They're not going to fire him, so would he try to find his own way out? I mean, I think it's a little premature to go there. Also, I don't really have a sense of what the NFL's interest in him would be. I think that was a lot more clear-cut when it was only a year or two after the 49ers situation. Right now, he's been struggling. He's been underachieving, and he's now 5 years removed from the NFL. Would there still be that strong interest? I'm not sure.
So big game coming up. It's always a big game, especially for those schools, but Notre Dame and Michigan. And Michigan seems to be getting a lot of credit from Vegas going into this game against Notre Dame, when Notre Dame looks like they may have one of their best teams in recent vintage. What are your thoughts on Michigan getting a lot of credit going into this game?
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. Now, once I started digging into it a little bit, a lot of the analytics, the power rankings say that that Michigan is either a slightly better team than Notre Dame, or that they're about even, and they're playing at home. To me, one of the big differences, though, and excuse me, somebody's coming in right now, but
that's all right.
The fact that Michigan is probably one of the most turnover-prone teams in the entire country, and Notre Dame is one of the least turnover-prone teams in the entire country. Michigan's going to have to be less sloppy in this game than they have been so far this season.
Now I want to move on to something else. And these are the kinds of questions. This is why I love having you on, and what I love about college football is assessing a guy like Tom Herman. What is your thought on Tom Herman at the University of Texas? Because, of course, it's an eternal thing. There's a lot of programs out there like that. Programs like USC, Georgia, Tennessee, they want to believe that they're in the college football playoff discussion every single year. They should be. Texas is in that category. What's your assessment of Tom Herman? And is he that guy at Texas to take them to the level of where they want to go?
Well, I'm a little surprised that they're not further along than they are. Obviously, they're struggling right now tremendously on defense. He has signed great recruiting classes since he's been there. I don't know that many of those guys we've really seen yet. They're still pretty young, but they're still a lot better than they have been for the previous decade. Obviously, they finished in the top 10 last year. They're in the top 15 right now. This is a team that under late years of Mac Brown and then obviously Charlie Strong was losing records most of the time. So they've made progress. I think it's unfortunate for him and unavoidable that he gets measured against Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley took over a program that was already going to playoffs, already contending for playoffs. Herman has had to rebuild.
Let's talk now quickly, and I want to ask you about the college football playoff here in a second, but I want to also talk about my alma mater, Georgia, because it's a team that, and this is something I've been saying, and I've read a little bit of what you've written about it, but the game against South Carolina was disappointing, but for my money, that Kentucky game was almost as disappointing, if not more so disappointing for Georgia. I mean, where are you right now on the Bulldogs? And how much of this has to do with Kirby Smart endemically? I mean, is this something that could continue on, the struggles that the Bulldogs are going through right now?
Well, bigger picture, I think after the South Carolina game, after he made some more kind of baffling strategic decisions at the end of that game, that's been a recurring thing, and that's certainly a reason for Georgia fans to be concerned a little bit more generally. We know he's a great recruiter. We know he's a great CEO. He hasn't necessarily been the best in-game coach. But in terms of what's going on right now this season, it's pretty baffling how Jake Fromm, who I think has always been a very underrated quarterback, has been a great leader for them. First, he throws 3 interceptions against South Carolina. That was very uncharacteristic. He threw for a grand total of 35 yards against Kentucky. I know it was raining, it was a downpour. They didn't necessarily need to score a lot of points against Kentucky, but that's still concerning to me. I think part of that at least is, I mean, obviously there's something going on with Fromm, but the one question mark Georgia had coming into this season for sure was receiver. They lost their top 4 receivers. And, seeing what happened against South Carolina, against Kentucky, I just don't think they have guys right now that can win matchups on the outside against, better. Certainly South Carolina had this, upper tier defensive backs. So that's going to be a problem going forward.
Visiting with Stuart Mandel of The Athletic. Let's talk a little bit about the college football playoff. And I think the best indication as to the problem with the college football playoff is that Oregon is not right now in that college football playoff conversation. I mean, what are your thoughts on that and the future of possible expansion with the college football playoff?
It would be real. I think Oregon's really good. I think it's a little premature to suggest that they're going to go 12-1. They've got some tough games down the stretch here in the Pac-12. But if they're a 12-1 Pac-12 champ at the end of the year, and their only loss is a game against Auburn that they didn't have to schedule that game. They could have played 3 nobodies like a lot of teams do, and are just automatically discounted from the playoff race. I think that you're certainly going to see a lot of outrage on the West Coast, and you may nationally as well. I think last year was the first year, if you remember, after the playoff, Jim Delaney, who was the last person on the playoff bandwagon in the first place, started talking openly about expansion. So did a lot of other influential figures, Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner. Obviously, they all knew 5 conferences, 4 spots, somebody's going to get left out. What I think that they are frustrated about in the Big 10 and especially in the Pac-12 is they play 9 conference games. The SEC and ACC play 8. The Pac-12 schedules very ambitiously out of conference, like in Oregon taking on Auburn. The SEC and the ACC don't always do that. So I think they thought they would be more they would get rewarded in this system more than they have to this point. So far, it's been don't lose, go undefeated, and if you do lose, it can't be a bad loss like Ohio State's had the last couple of years. Those lopsided losses against Iowa and Purdue.
Another example of what we're talking about, of course, is Minnesota and Baylor. I mean, these are major schools, not necessarily perennial programs, but if you place it in the context of any sports league, right? Any league, including, of course, college basketball, but for those programs to be achieving, and I know the schedule has been soft, and I know there's certain circumstances that are falling for those schools, for college football to not have the sort of discussion that you're going to have in every other sports league with the media, I think it really speaks to why college football is off the radar when it comes to the debate shows and whatnot. But I want to ask you specifically about Baylor and Minnesota. Are these schools in their start under these coaches, are they frauds? Is this a case of poor schedules that they're playing against, or are these teams legitimate?
I don't think they're frauds. I think when you're not a brand name program and you haven't necessarily had that success recently, and Baylor did under Art Briles, but then it imploded, obviously. It's just going to take a while for the public to believe in you. And obviously Baylor has yet to play Oklahoma or Texas. Minnesota has yet to play Penn State or Wisconsin. It's going to take winning one of those games, I think, to be truly taken seriously. I've been really impressed with Baylor, given where they were after that scandal. They were 1-11 in Matt Rule's first year. They are playing really good defense, and they've got a very underrated quarterback in Charlie Brewer. It would not surprise me at all if Baylor ends up in the Big 12 title game, especially given how much Texas is struggling on defense. Whereas Minnesota, I think the schedule will catch up to them here pretty soon. But if they go 9-3, that's still a really good season in PJ Fleck's third year.
Last thing, where are you on Clemson?
I think Clemson's in a position that I've seen a lot when a team is coming off a national championship and on a long winning streak. They are competing against the bar that they themselves set. And so Trevor Lawrence doesn't look as good as he did last year. So people are concerned about that. It's a close game against Louisville in the first half before they blow it open. If you're not winning 56-0 every week, people think something's wrong with you. By the end of the season, I fully expect they will be, they'll have every opportunity to win the national championship. They have such elite talent. Their only issue is they cannot slip up. I think given how weak the ACC is, they may not play a top 25 team all year. That team, 13-0, they'll be in. 12-1, I don't think it's as clear cut, even defending national champion or not.
Stuart, I can't thank you enough. Congratulations on the success of The Athletic. Thanks so much for popping in. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Stuart Mandel, The Athletic. He is college football editor-in-chief at The Athletic, and I highly suggest, if you haven't subscribed already, just get it over with. Subscribe, because it is a no-brainer in terms of content every single day. It's clean. It doesn't take over your browser. They've got great podcasts. You name it. It is the best source out there for all of the coverage across the board when it comes to college football, individual teams, when it comes to national coverage. So I appreciate it again. Thank you so much, Stuart.
Thanks for having me.
That's Stuart Mandel, and we will continue on with, and I really do, by the way, I absolutely feel that way, 100%. I don't give endorsements. I don't give suggestions to you unless I've experienced them myself, kind of like that brisket sandwich at Subway, which I've mentioned to our friend Jared Sandler down on Dallas's 105.3 The Fan. Whenever we have him on, we talk about that because I really do like the brisket sandwich at Subway, and I really do like the Athletic and what they're doing. And an example of like when you're looking at something, and by the way, we'll have Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network coming up here shortly to talk some NFL. We'll talk some trade deadline, some of the things that are coming off the wire as we speak, because of course he's responsible for the wire. Ian Rappaport is the guy who is making the news that we're all talking about. So that's coming up. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to revisit while we get the opportunity, and I don't know how much time we have, Cam, if we got enough time to run at least one comment that we got from one of the inside the NBA personalities that really struck a chord, I think, with people on Twitter. And I've seen it personally from a tweet that I sent out that was video of Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq. As you know, he's one of the hosts on Inside the NBA on TNT, and they did a long form pregame show before the Clippers and the Lakers last night outside of Staples Center. And so the discussion, and to the credit of that crew on air, I think nothing speaks to the abilities of Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, Chuck Barkley, Shaq, than their discussion. And before the end of the day, I would like to run it back so you could see the entire discussion, because not everybody agreed that it was a great idea that Daryl Morey tweeted out support of Hong Kong, deleted it. We all know what's happened since then. And now the Chinese government is pushing back. We need to follow up on that. That's not going away. But so you had everybody on a different side, but the discussion, and I don't know, Cam, if you have that clip available, if you're dealing with something else, but what I'd like to do is bring the Shaq comment up about Daryl Morey and his tweet so you can find out what Shaq was thinking. Go ahead.
Wrong going on anywhere in the world, you should have the right to say that's not right, and that's what he did. Daryl Morey was right. Whenever you see something wrong going on anywhere in the world, you should have the right to say that's not right, and that's what he did.
So you could see the setting there. You had everybody outside of Staples Center. What was really neat about that was, and I'm on Shaq's side, but I'm also on Ernie Johnson's side based on some of the things that he said. I'm also kind of on the side of Kenny Smith. I'm not really on Chuck's side. Chuck was defending LeBron James kind of passionately, and I think that LeBron kind of took the wrong tact in his approach. And we may revisit this after we visit with Ian Rappaport coming up, in showing you some of the comments that especially Charles Barkley made. I don't think we have time right now, but I did want to address what was going on. Let's take a look here. I want to check up on the NFL briefly. Let's see what Ian's doing. When we have Ian Rappaport on, I want to make sure, and he's going to come up here in a minute or two. I want to make sure we're up to date on the very, very latest. Let's see. Okay, we're up to date. So when it comes to the debate that went on, spoiler alert, Kenny Smith was kind of in the middle. I think he was more on the side of the gesture by Morey was important. It was valuable, and the timing of it was legitimate. Ernie Johnson, well, I'll just assess it for you. I'll break it down for you. This is a scorecard. Shaquille O'Neal was for Daryl Morey's tweet, pointing out something that's wrong, putting it in the context of freedom of speech. You heard him talk about it, and that's something that he repeated over and over again throughout his discussion on it with the other three panelists. Now, Shaq did say at one point during his comments that, because Shaq does a lot of business over in China, he's been to China more than probably the other three guys on the panel put together. And Shaq did say, look, when you do a lot of business in China, there's certain things, and he used these words, you have to tiptoe around. Okay? Tiptoe around. So Shaq is a pragmatist, right? And listen, in the context of all the business that's done in China right now, what he's saying, I mean, what are you going to do? Now, I do think that there's a very important distinction, and Kenny Smith struck upon it in their discussion. On one side, you've got LeBron James and you've got Charles Barkley. Where are they coming from? They're coming from a place of cynicism. And Charles Barkley said it on a clip that I've seen that TMZ got of him at the airport when he came into town originally for this opening game. They talked to him about it, the way TMZ does on the sidewalk. But one of his points was, and LeBron made this point, I think, in his, what I thought were ill-advised comments, was, look, you're not going to change anything. And Barkley mentions it's a communist country. You're not going to change anything. All right. And I honestly think of all of the subjects and topics that have been thrown around in relation to this story, right? That's the most important point. To not be able to recognize what the United States was founded on against seemingly impossible odds. Just go back into recent history and look at the endemic nature of segregation in the South, racial segregation in the United States, but particularly in the American South, right? You could absolutely, make that argument. And for most people in the United States in 1938 or even 1954, that would be a legitimate response. Look, you're not going to change anything. This is a way of life. It's been going on for hundreds of years, whether it's the American South, thousands of years, well, not thousands, but as we understand it, the government in China has been going on for decades and decades and decades. Of course, you could say the same thing about the Soviet Union, right? You're never going to change it. And that's where I really depart from those guys. And I think that that's what's fueling them in their justification for being such bloodless pragmatists, if you will, extracting out that element of it, the impossible odds, and overcoming that. That's really what I think is the basis, the underpinning of the United States. We're not all out there rooting for the underdog every single day, but that's really what I think is the glue that keeps this thing together, that we have this indomitable spirit and belief in ourselves, even when it's seemingly against all odds, right? And of course, human nature is to manufacture that even when it doesn't exist. But in the case of China, such an overwhelming, kind of opaque, almost mythical place for us, the forbidden city, right? So that's where I think when you looked at Kenny Smith, yeah, I did, by the way, Cam, I did see the thing about Pat Mahomes, and I'll ask Ian about that here in a moment, but thanks for reminding me. Cam Smith, our producer today here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. When you look at Kenny Smith and the way he presented the situation, and we're going to run that here in a minute, he really drilled down on the principle that I'm bringing up. The fact that you cannot allow yourself to, whatever it is, for whatever reason, it's just ignorance or it's a justification in your mind for, placing business interests above all. You have to remain having a sense of humanity. And I think that's what Kenny Smith represented on Inside the NBA during that discussion about Daryl Morey's tweets. So now we're going to head on over to the NFL Network and visit with Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network, who is, Ian, and I appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much. Sure. And I was talking about The Wire. Well, I'll have to check The Wire and see what's going on in the NFL. Well, you are The Wire half the time. So it's great to have the source, man. And you've got some of the latest breaking news out of Kansas City. What's the latest with Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, I mean, this was little bit of a surprise from Andy Reid. You hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes, it's sort of being reported as he's going to practice. He's not really going to practice. He's going to go out there and throw on the field. They're going to see if he can get through an individual drill, which, he's not really going to do much. But still, the fact that he was lying on the turf about a week or so ago with a dislocated kneecap, now he's going to at least be out on 2 feet practicing, sort of practicing, is a very good sign. I mean, and this kind of goes back to what we originally discussed and reported, was that his MRI came out as good as humanly possible with minimal damage. He was kept still when this injury happened. I believe it was the referee, basically said, don't move. And so he didn't move. And because of that, he didn't damage anything else in his knee other than the kneecap. They put it back.
Wow.
As they needed to, and he walked off the field. So all of this is good. He wants to beat the 3-week timetable. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to try to make sure he's cautious. But still, the fact that he's standing out there at practice is very good.
Knowing what you know about Andy Reid, what kind of role do you think Andy Reid could play in this, in his predisposition with past similar situations?
Well, I think, if there's any coach in the NFL better at getting the most out of their backup quarterback, then I don't know it. You know what I mean? Like, Andy Reid has done this it hadn't happened a ton with the Chiefs, although theoretically Patrick Mahomes was a backup quarterback at 1.2. But, in his past with the Eagles, he has gotten backup quarterbacks, third-string quarterbacks to perform at a level where they are good and adequate and can keep the team moving. He is incredible at that. So, I mean, to me, and this is why everyone wanted to what quarterback are they going to acquire? I don't think they ever even considered it, because they have a head coach who's so good at getting their backup quarterback to play like a starter that there's no need to go out and spend a draft pick and acquire someone.
Visiting with Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, of course, we've got the trading deadline coming up, and that's a big focus right now in the NFL. Who do you think are going to be, and we're already starting to see a little bit of that or an indication of that, who are the teams out there that could be deadline sellers?
Well, I think the sellers, you take a look at some of the teams that are struggling. I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals, I do not get the sense that they're really going to be sellers. I know everyone talks about A.J. Green. I don't feel like they ever considered trading A.J. Green. That's just – they don't want to trade off good players. And, they are not a team, I don't think, that's going to do a fire sale. So I don't foresee them. But the other teams that aren't as good, I think you could see them dealing some. The Jets would be certainly a good example of that. Could they end up making a deal or two? Certainly think that's possible. Atlanta Falcons, another one. Could they trade Vic Beasley? Possibly. Denver Broncos made a trade yesterday for Emmanuel Sanders. Could they trade Chris Harris? Derek Wolfe? Possible. Those are some of the teams. The teams kind of at the bottom. The Miami Dolphins have Kenyon Drake. Who's going to be a free agent. Seems to be more than willing to be traded. That is another one to keep our eye on. So there's going to be a fair amount of sellers. We'll see how many buyers there actually are, though this trade market is probably more acceptable deals than anything.
A lot of speculation about the Chicago Bears quarterback position in particular. Where are you on that right now as far as the Bears are concerned in the context of the trading deadline and just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't foresee them doing much. I mean, this is now maybe I'm crazy, maybe I missed everything, or maybe next week we'll bring something we're not expecting. But to me, Mitch Trubisky is their guy. Matt Nagy is their play caller. I know everyone's getting, they're coming under fire. I get that, absolutely get that. But they've invested so much in Trubisky. If they're going to go away, it's similar to Marcus Mariota and Tennessee Titans. If they're going to go away from him, then it has to be with the knowledge that it's over. Like that is over. That they've closed the book on a guy they moved up to trade in the top 5 and all that. So, I mean, I don't see them doing anything yet, but it is very clear that this kind of performance just cannot continue. And the fact that they have a backup in Chase Daniel who's pretty good just kind of ups the ante.
Visiting with Ian Rappaport at the NFL Network. When you talk about cognitive dissonance, that kind of defines the New York Jets, I think, in the past. But when you look at the result against the Cowboys, right, the fact that the Jets beat the Cowboys and they beat them with Darnold in the saddle, and then we see what happened this past game, How do you explain that? How do you resolve that in your mind?
I mean, the only thing I can come up with, and I've thought about this a lot, obviously, is Darnold played bad. He really did. Like, the team, I thought the defense actually looked fine. Honestly, like, pretty good. They had nothing to work with in the office, but the Jets defense looked pretty good. Brady didn't look comfortable. Stats are fine, but, you know, obviously the Patriots offense is not in a place where they want. They went out and traded for, you know, Mohamed Sanu. That's a sign. And give up a second rounder. That's a sign that they are not done offensively. But Darnold played terrible. You know, couldn't read anything. And obviously we've heard the comment about him seeing ghosts. I think that was real and legitimate. He did not know what he was seeing out there. Fundamentally, he was way off. People have bad days, yes, absolutely. But that was troubling to watch. And obviously the Jets, you know, are hopeful that
but
was,
is this a different
an
defense? I've heard some speculation when you saw the pen and the paper out with Bill Belichick, and you've got his son there, you've got Mayo there. Is this a really fundamentally different defense with the Patriots in relation to that Jets game? We saw a sign of that because Bill Belichick is taking more of a personal individual interest. Is that what's happening here?
He is taking more of an interest, but Gerard Mayo is the guy who, you know, is sort of out front here, calling it or relaying the calls or talking about it with Belichick and then, you know, getting the word out, however you want to say it. You know, Mayo is really the new sort of thing here. I mean, then they've had great coordinators. I mean, two of them are head coaches right now, Matt Patricia, Brian Flores. So, and Belichick's always been involved. So, yes, he is definitely involved. But Gerard Mayo is kind of the interesting one here. You know, he was – everybody would joke with him and call him Gerard Belichick when he was a player. I covered him as a player. He's a great guy. The fact that he's been able to come in here as a position coach, take such a heavy – calling it and have one of the best defenses we've ever seen is pretty astounding, honestly.
What are your thoughts about the rumors coming out of Philadelphia, coming out of the locker room, things starting to fly around there with Peterson?
As far as what?
We've heard that there could be players out there. We've had on the record accounts of players being late to practice and not showing up for meetings. And then, of course, there's speculation about where some of this information is coming, and then maybe perhaps having to simplify the offense. That's from an unnamed source for Carson Wentz. So any thoughts about Doug Peterson's grip on that team, or is this just a response to what took place against the Cowboys?
Well, I think first of all, it's obviously true that players have been late and, you know, not shown up for things. I mean, Lane Johnson is as reliable a person as you could imagine. So he says it, I believe it. So that part is true. You know, simplifying the offense, I don't know. We sort of tend to hear things like that. I remember talking to an offensive coordinator 2 years ago, about the sort of media narrative about them simplifying the offense. And the response I got was like, yeah, of course we're going to say that because that's what the media wants to hear. You know, I don't really get the sense anybody actually simplifies the offense. They may try to call it better. But to me, this is just what happens when you lose and you get your butts kicked by the Cowboys on national TV. Then some of this stuff starts to come out. Now, the reality is there's people in every single building that are late. Some people miss things. You know, this happens it happens to the Patriots, who are awesome. And I've seen it. I covered them for 3 years. It always happens. So to me, this is more this stuff coming out as people try to find a reason why are the Eagles losing, when in reality they're losing because they can't really cover anybody.
Well, most importantly, I want to congratulate you for your Columbia Lions getting off the schneid against those Penn Quakers. Big win.
Yeah.
And I can hear the Daily Wire. It's calling you, as always, as we're on the line with you. I can't thank you enough for jumping on with us, Ian, and keeping us up to date on what's going on. Thanks so much for the time.
Absolutely, man. Happy to do it. And yeah, let me go see what text
ding,
message.
Ding, ding.
Hopefully
all right, that's Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. Nice enough to drop in and say hello and to keep us up to date on what's going on as far as the trade deadline is concerned. That's coming up. And he got him from his den. It's a little bit different look than you normally see him on NFL Network, because God knows we all see him there, right? He's got the Columbia Lions helmet back there. He's an alma mater, an alum of Columbia University. So we're happy to have him on. And, man, we've got a lot of amazing guests that are coming up tomorrow as well. And we do this every single day, weekdays, Monday through Friday, Sports by Brooks on Fancred from noon to 2 Eastern time. You heard we had an amazing lineup of college football guests in the first hour of the show. Just visited with Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. We bring you every angle, and you can bet we're going to have some NBA guests coming up, because that's been the subject of what we've been talking about besides football today. We've been talking about my experience going to the Clippers and Lakers game. I was there last night at Staples Center, watched Kawhi Leonard get booed. We played some of the video and the audio from Kawhi Leonard. Imagine in his home debut, this beloved player from Southern California, all that entails. And you've got this incredible team. That's the thing that people, I think, don't recognize with the Clippers, is it's a team that's got a lot of talent. It's under the radar. They made the playoffs, a lot of energy, a defensive-oriented team, but a team that can score with a guy like Lou Williams, certainly. Now you add in these two dynamic defensive players that's right, defensive players, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And how is it that people are not talking about this team as being perhaps a successor to the Golden State Warriors when it comes to dynastic success, right? I think that's what you're looking at. Of course, the health problem, that's a possibility. Load management, that may mute a season in which maybe just have 10, 12 losses. That's probably not going to happen in this particular case. Not saying that it couldn't. And I think if there wasn't load management as it pertains to Kawhi Leonard, it would. But because you've got to always fall back on the health, and that makes sense. I mean, just ask Kevin Durant. You look around the league. I mean, the schedule, it's just too long. The number of games is too many. It needs to be scaled back. Adam Silver's kind of ahead of the game on that. The commissioner, as usual, ahead of the game on everything. When it comes to running a league, the NBA is at the forefront of that. He's talked about having a format like what they have in soccer over in Europe. The Champions League, UEFA League, those sorts of tournaments to break up the monotony of the season, cut down on the number of games. I honestly think it's crucial that the NBA does that, right? Of course, there's pushback from the smaller market teams because that could end up causing contraction. That's a word that most of you out there probably have never heard in relation to professional sports, but man, it has been a topic of conversation over the years. We've got a high-flying economy. You've got revenue sources over in places like China for now, for the NBA, right? For now. But they're opening up markets in India. They're going to start a professional league there. They're opening up markets in Africa. Streams of revenue. So we don't hear about contraction anymore. But when you see those big numbers, ridiculous numbers in terms of salary for NBA players, that's because of China. And that's also going to be because of India in the future and Africa. Once upon a time, it wasn't that way. We were talking about losing teams in leagues like the NBA and Major League Baseball. But that's out the window, not to say that it couldn't come back. And if you're talking about limiting the number of games, right, contraction is something that could come into play with a league like the NBA because you're taking away this integral revenue for a team like a Memphis, right? Especially if China becomes problematic. China is upwards of 15% of revenue for NBA teams now across the board because of their hundreds of millions of dollars coming in from their streaming deal with Tencent, which is kind of the Netflix of sports in China and disseminates ESPN content as well. Tencent is the name of the company. It's essentially a state-run organization like most of the private sector is for the most part in China. I'm talking about Chinese companies, right? But so the smaller markets, they're going to rely on that revenue over in China. And if that becomes compromised, which who's to say it won't, it might, that could affect the financial future of some of the teams in the NBA. But at the very least, you've got to consider cutting the number of games down. And I'd love for them to cut the number of teams down. It's amazing to me that we have a team like the Lakers. When you watch the Lakers last night, they're just not, they're not a coherent group. It doesn't come off that way, right? For whatever reason. I'm not saying the Lakers aren't going to be in the finals or win a championship. It's possible, right? But it doesn't look like that team has been assembled as a group that is wholly connected, right? When you watch them out on the court. Danny Green, I think, is a huge acquisition for the Lakers, the sharp shooting ability. But I'm going with the Clippers. Now, what I wanted to revisit, and we talked about it briefly in the interim between our interviews, is what was talked about last night, because this was amazing. If you missed it, right, you know how reticent everybody is to talk about, we can't talk about Daryl Morey. No. We saw what happened to LeBron James. It's interesting. Charles Barkley, we're going to run this clip. Do you have that clip available where we could run the whole thing? I want you to see. I really want everybody out there who's watching with me to see the whole discussion, which runs about 8 minutes. I'd like to run that clip just so you could see the width and the breadth of the conversation. And then I want to come back and I want to specifically address what Charles Barkley has said about LeBron James in the context of the Daryl Morey tweet discussion. So go ahead. This is inside the NBA, on TNT last night.
Let's talk about what we saw in China and how it affects the NBA and how things stand right now. And I should point out that on Thursday night, when we are in San Francisco for opening night there, the commissioner, Adam Silver, will be joining us, and we'll have a chance to talk to him about that. But here's the thing. When this was going down, Shaq, and people may not know, we've kind of got an inside joke here because you spend so much time in China that it's almost like, what are you doing this weekend, Shaq? Going to China. Yeah, because you've been there a lot for, I assume, for business over there.
Yes.
So how did you watch as all this played out?
We as American people, we do a lot of business in China, and they know and understand our values, and we understand their values. And one of our best values here in America is free speech. We're allowed to say what we want to say, and we're allowed to speak up about injustices, and that's just how it goes. And if people don't understand that, that's something that they have to deal with. But, I just thought it was unfortunate for, both parties, and then you got people speaking when they don't know what they're talking about. But Daryl Morey was right. Whenever you see something wrong going on anywhere in the world, you should have the right to say that's not right, and that's what he did. And but again, when it comes to business, sometimes you have to tiptoe around things. But again, they understand our values. We understand our values, and here we have the right to speak, especially with the social media. We're going to say whatever we want to say when we want to say it.
I realize that, and I'll get into where I fall on that thing. But I'd like to hear you, Kenny. What did you have the biggest problem with? Did you have a big problem with Daryl Morey tweeting that out?
No, I didn't have a problem with him tweeting it out because that's the way he felt. That's the research he did in his mind. That's what he thought was pertinent at the time. It would just kind of be the same way if we don't allow Daryl Morey, even if you believe him or not, to speak, it would like saying, LeBron, shut up and dribble. Like, he has an opportunity to speak. If you agree or don't disagree, you have that opportunity to combat it with valid information and valid points to be contrary to it. The same way you would have had to do that when LeBron was speaking on social justice, as Chris Paul was, and Carmelo Anthony. You would have the right, and the same way with when the kneeling was going on in football, you have the right to speak about it if you don't like it, or you feel it's an injustice. So I didn't have a problem with him talking or him tweeting whatever he wanted to do.
Well, I had a problem because the Rockets are they're the most popular team. If anybody else had sent a tweet, it probably would have raised some eyebrows. But because the Houston Rockets and their affiliation with Yao Ming, they're the most popular team in China. So that was the first thing he should have thought about. Like, I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking for the entire Rockets organization. And like I say, because of Yao Ming, the Rockets are by far and away the most popular team in China. You can't come to my country and make money and insult me. We don't get to impress our values on other countries. Oh, that's my first thing. Secondly, listen, I thought what happened to LeBron was unfair. Daryl Morey had the right to say it, but he didn't look at the big picture. But I thought what happened to LeBron was unfair because LeBron was caught in the middle for 3 reasons. Number one, LeBron makes $1 billion a year from Nike. Nike makes $6 billion a year in China. The NBA makes billions of dollars a year in China. All these other American companies make money in China. Why is it up to the NBA, Adam Silver, LeBron James, to ruin their financial situation while all these other companies are allowed to make money in China?
Yeah, I don't think, Chuck, it was about the companies making in China. I think that, again, if you feel there's social injustice going on, you have this right to speak.
You have the right
but you have to you have to be valid and have a valid explanation of why you're pointing.
Let me make this point based on what you said, because I know what you're saying, and I know what you're saying, and I know the availability of social media makes your opinion, boom, instantaneous if you want it out there. I don't disagree, and I don't think Daryl Morey was misinformed by the situation in Hong Kong. I think he knew what was going on there, but I think you also have to know what the purpose of your trip is and the timing of something like that, because I think the timing of it is what sent everything sideways. I think back to when I went to Cuba before the U.S. could go to Cuba back in 1991, and we were there with ABC to broadcast the Pan American Games. Mm-hmm. The last thing I was going to do when I got there is say, man, this Fidel Castro's got to go. Yeah. That's not what I'm going to do when I'm there. Look, I agree. And I think there's a responsibility when you're in your country and you see something. Yeah, I mean, you say, hey, that's an injustice. I'm calling you out on that. But I think there has to be some restraint when you go overseas and you go to a place there. You're not there to change the political system. You're there,
and you're not going to.
Yeah, I know. And you're basically,
this is where I
depart.
On a
goodwill trip
I depart
with
from
the
Chuck.
NBA, which has worked for ages on this relationship. So I think there's got to be some restraint. And
now
I don't
watch
have
Kenny
a problem
Smith
with what was tweeted. It's more to me when it was.
Yeah, and I agree. I hear what you're saying, Ernie. Maybe not agree, but I hear what you're saying. But he also, the reason you're bringing light. If he's on the side of what was going on in Hong Kong, he's on that side. He understood that the only time he's going to bring light to it is now. So he's not going to. No, you can't. He's not going to come back. Like if he tweeted that today, it doesn't get the attention. We're not talking about it on air. No, we're not talking. If you're talking about someone who's looking for social injustice and saying it, they feel that way. If he feels it, he's going to do it when he can believe that it's going to get the attention of what's going on. I mean, that's the way
now Ernie makes a good point here.
Is in America.
Listen,
that's the way it worked here.
How about the way the league handled it?
Great. The league was called, like I say, the same with LeBron. I hear all these idiots and fools and jackasses on television and radio talking about bad about LeBron. He sold out for the money. First of all, there's nothing wrong with him protecting his money. Number one, that's the first thing. But secondly, he was protecting the NBA's money and he was protecting Nike's money. Why is that such a bad thing? LeBron had nothing to do with this tweet. Nothing to do with this tweet. Why should he sacrifice? Like, on all these people who criticize LeBron.
So you think he was being sacrificed?
He was being sacrificed.
Again. No, I'm talking about, meaning his money was going to be affected by Daryl Morey's tweet?
Oh, if LeBron had came out and insulted China.
But he didn't. I'm saying if he didn't say anything, you think?
Oh, no, but once he said something.
Okay.
But my point is,
but that was his choice.
Trash China. It would have hurt Nike and the NBA and himself.
I agree with that, but however, China can't tell us what to do and we can't tell them what to do. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
We can send tweets, we got free speech, we can say what we want to say when we want to say it,
but we all have a responsibility to our employer too. Yeah, what you want to call it, selling out of whatever. I can't come on. I can't come on TV and say anything I want to politically. I can't do that.
Well, you've been doing it.
No. I can joke about.
I've been sitting next to you for the last 20 years.
I can joke about basketball. It seems longer. But seriously, Daryl Morey.
I don't have a problem with what he tweeted.
Listen, Daryl Morey he's done a good job, but his allegiance is to the Houston Rockets.
No, I don't.
And the NBA. I don't think listen, and he can quit if he's not happy with it.
No, he
can quit if he's not happy with it.
Say I don't like the Rockets.
And you know what?
It's almost over.
Let me just say this last thing because I know
this is a good point, Byron.
But look, if Daryl that trip and comes back to Houston and tells the Houston Chronicle, look, I want to write an op-ed piece about my experience as a U.S. citizen in China and talk about Hong Kong and talk about China, that would get legs. That would be picked up there, and the way.
But that's the way I've been saying, Ernie. That's the way you would have done it. But he did it that way, and we can't fault him for doing it the way he wanted to do it.
Because he did it from the confines of his little friendly home while them NBA players were over there.
Exactly.
That's what LeBron said. Wait, he tweeted, and then we had to go.
Yeah, that is a very important point. I think the whole discussion, by the way, this is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We just watched about 8 minutes of Inside the NBA, which to me, that will go down as the definitive discussion. That, and I tweeted this out. I tweeted out a link to the entire discussion. I put it up on YouTube, about 8 minutes. And my tweet was, here's what I wrote. Entire discussion of Daryl Morey's tweet on TNT's Inside the NBA with Shaq, Ernie, Kenny, and Chuck. All sides of the subject are calmly and respectfully presented. This should be required viewing in every school classroom. This is what defines America. Right there. Right there. My finger. Right there. That's it. What's amazing about that discussion was all four people had different sides. Now, Shaq's kind of like a little fluid, I guess you could say. He was chiming in, get him, Chuck, at the end, kind of something like of that nature, right? I mean, his big key is we got free speech. Let's stick with that. And Shaq, of course, comes from a military family, so that's his baseline. You know, our constitutional right to free speech. That's never going to change. And that was emphasized by everybody, of course. And that's what makes us all Americans, right? And I did think that one of the more interesting dynamics where I can go either way, for the most part, I'm on one side or the other in these issues, right? But the one area where I'm wavering is Ernie Johnson made a good point. If Daryl Morey wants to write an op-ed in the New York Times, which he probably could do, or in the Houston Chronicle or wherever, if he wants a platform, Daryl Morey can get it to make a statement about Hong Kong. And he doesn't have to do it, and he shouldn't necessarily have done it with guys over there representing the NBA, because it's not as if their well-being was threatened. Now, LeBron James can claim that. I think he's intimating that to a certain extent. I think that's what he was intimating, which is absurd. You know, China's got the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games. What are we going to send a search party out with our Winter Olympic team to find LeBron since he's missing? Because of Daryl Morey's tweet, that would never happen, obviously. So that's a red herring. That's not part of the discussion. What did happen was it muted the want to comment on that situation by the NBA players. Of course, they sanctioned themselves. LeBron James was behind that. We now know he's the reason the players fell silent in China. All right. And certainly he was extremely resentful of that. And it also impugned the ability of Adam Silver really to speak his mind. We found out later as he came over here, he now claims that China asked him or intimated to him that Morey should have been fired. So that's understandable from that context. You've got the guys over there. What are they going to do? They're in China. Not going to do anything, which is part of the problem. Maybe you shouldn't be over there in the first place, right? So it's understandable that you would bring up the timing of it. And if you wanted a platform, you could probably do that. But of course, that's premeditated. And would Morey ever actually do that? But the crux of the issue, the most important part of this discussion, besides the free speech part of it, freedom of expression, which Adam Silver, to his credit, did come out and emphasized he was not apologizing to China while he was in Japan, of course, before he got to China. That's when all hell broke loose after Silver did that. But 2 points I want to make. Number one is the whole idea that you can't affect change in a place like China. That's bullshit. Pardon my French. That's baloney. That's not true. And that's the problem, I think, with the argument. And that's where I think LeBron and Charles Barkley are coming from. Now, maybe that's a justification for doing what they do. It sounds like it, doesn't it? not saying anything or protecting our money, we're not going to be able to do anything anyway. That's not true. And I think that's the point that Kenny Smith was driving home. Kenny Smith did a masterful job. That guy should be a politician or a diplomat. Holy cow. And I've thought that before. Kenny Smith should run for office, because after that whole discussion, he was assertive, provocative in that discussion, got his point across, but you're not sure which side is he on. That was brilliant. Amazing. Except to emphasize, freedom of speech. But he also, I think, was really leaving the door open for affecting change. And I think that's really the point here. Well, he actually did show his hand when he said, hey, Ernie, Maury never could have gotten that sort of reaction, response, spotlight on Hong Kong, which now all of you guys out there that are watching today have a decent idea of at least what's going on. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is, obviously, there was probably the biggest part of the story for most typical people who are consuming this media and what's happening is, wow, did LeBron James screw up? What an a-hole. Now, in the context of that, I agree with Charles Barkley. It's been unfair. And the great irony is that nobody's saying that about Charles Barkley as he's defending LeBron James. He's on the same side. It wasn't just his defense of LeBron. He was saying the same things as LeBron, but you haven't heard a peep out. Now, it may pop up, but let's face it, he said the same stuff and nobody's saying a word about it, which kind of makes his point unwittingly that LeBron James, I don't know if he said it in that clip, but in the TMZ clip, we may play that for you tomorrow. We don't have enough time right now, but LeBron James made clear that people's predisposition about LeBron James is what was fueling the unfair criticism, unfair according to Chuck. And he has a point, because he was saying a lot of the same things in that clip, but nobody's talking about it today, including me. I didn't put it up, right? We all love Chuck, right? We don't love, well, I don't really have an opinion on LeBron James other than, well, I'm kind of agnostic. The guy does some good things and then he kind of offsets it sometimes. But we had a great show today. I want to thank our producer, Cam Smith. Outstanding job. Fancy footwork with the clips and with the guests. It was seamless, at least from his perspective. Like to think it was over here. From my perspective, here in Los Angeles, we do this every weekday, Monday through Friday, noon to around 2:00 in that neighborhood. And today we had some amazing guests. Scott Russell, a football scoop, who's the number one source for college football coaching changes and news. Football Scoop on Twitter. Mike Farrell of Rivals, national recruiting coordinator at Rivals, and probably knows more about recruiting than anybody in the country. Had him. Stuart Mandel, college football editor-in-chief from The Athletic, which needs no introduction. And just had Ian Rappaport on from NFL Network. And it was amazing, wasn't it? As we were on the horn with him, talking to him here on Fancred, that little bell went off. I don't know. We should have counted the numbers, right? We do a little bit on that with a highlight reel with Ian. The number of dings that went off because he was getting text messages on his iPhone. So, yeah. And maybe we'll revisit that Chuck clip tomorrow, so we can kind of get into what I was talking about here a second ago, as it pertains to proof that Barkley is right to a certain extent, that LeBron is being treated unfairly. And I don't think that's really breaking news for anybody when that's the biggest part of the story, his ill-advised comments. And I was first in line to criticize him, but I was criticizing him for different things than everybody else was. And that's a whole nother discussion. I go down that rabbit hole and we'll be here another 2 hours, right? But so we've got more guests coming up later on this week and more Sports by Brooks, of course. And so for our producer, Cam Smith, this is Brooks Melchior from Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.